Hello, I'm Sarah Galashan. This is Hannah Manstein tonight, live from Vancouver. Mark Carney's first budget will be delivered on November 4th, but in 30 minutes' time, the Prime Minister is going to give Canadians a preview. We will carry his remarks live when they begin. The Liberals are promising a transformational budget as the country grapples with tariffs, climate change and immigration. But the Prime Minister's spending plan is missing a key piece. Opposition support is lacking. Party leaders are demanding changes in exchange for their votes.
Will the Prime Minister learn from the inflationary, costly failures of the 10 years of Liberal government and accept our plan for an affordable budget for an affordable life?
We will do everything to help Canadians get ahead, as they have gotten ahead every single month since I became Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister says you've never had it so good. How is it possible for this Prime Minister to be so costly and so out of touch with reality?
Here. Mr. Speaker, it's time once again for our economic lesson. Okay. Getting ahead means your wages grow faster than inflation. Let's look at the relationship between inflation and deficits. The inflation rate in Canada, the food inflation rate, is the G7 average, and we have the lowest deficit in the G7. What the government is going to do is use that deficit to grow this economy like it's never seen before.
Here, here, well done.
This afternoon, Mark Carney met with a Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, in a, quote, spirit of collaboration.
I shared my view that we need the government to bring down its inflationary deficits and taxes. I was grateful for the chance to sit down with the Prime Minister. We had a good conversation. He didn't make any commitments, and so I'm looking forward to seeing what he comes up with.
You said you hoped he was in listening mode. Did you feel that was the case?
I think we both were. We had a good back and forth, and we shared our respective views. I'm not going to report to you anything that he said because that was in the four walls of the room. I can only speak for myself, and I reiterated that we need this to be an affordable budget.
As we await the address from the Prime Minister, I want to bring in our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton. Rosemary, so what do we know about the speech that's to come?
Well, I mean, this is really an opportunity, Sarah, for the Prime Minister to sort of lay the groundwork of what this first budget, as you point out, is going to be about. And you hinted at a couple of the things that we already know. We will hear the Prime Minister confirm tonight that the budget itself will contain the Liberals' immigration plan, which, as you know, has changed since the previous Prime Minister to scale it down in some way. There is a desire by the Prime Minister to get immigration quote unquote under control. So we'll hear more about that. We will hear that the climate competitiveness strategy that the government has been working on, we will see elements of that inside the budget. That is to address not just fighting climate change, but finding ways and economic opportunities out of it. And you will hear more about, and this is the key part of it really, about how investment in the Canadian economy can lead to economic growth, as well as the word transformational. The government likes to call this a generational budget, and you will see that tonight as well, because he is primarily speaking to young Canadians, university students, people who might be struggling right now in the economy, and it'll be a chance for the Prime Minister to lay out how a future economy, the economy that he is trying to grow, the economy that he was elected to grow, it will benefit those young Canadians moving forward.
And why do you think he is giving this speech? I mean, November 4th is the budget. This is a bit of a ways out. Why speak tonight?
A couple of reasons. First of all, he's leaving on Friday for a pretty big and significant tour through Asia for APEC and ASEAN meetings of other kinds. He'll be gone for 10, 11 days. So he will be kind of out of the mix. I mean, in the news, of course, but out of the mix in terms of speaking directly to Canadians. So this is a chance to do that before he leaves on what is also an important trade and security mission. So his chance to sort of set the narrative with his own words about this budget. And the second piece is he needs to get Canadians thinking about what this budget is, because as well as all the elements there that sources have told us to watch for, it is a budget that is going to have a hefty deficit, a deficit that is something that Canadians might be willing to accept and prepared to see during a recession or a pandemic, for instance, but not as a way to necessarily grow the economy. People are estimating it could be anywhere between $70 to $100 billion deficit. The government is, as you know, also dividing the budget up, so it will look a little bit different. You will be able to see operational spending, which is things like health transfers and salaries, versus capital spending, which is the piece that the government and the Prime Minister is hoping will help the economy, strengthen the economy, attract private capital, create jobs and growth inside the economy at a critical moment when we are facing that trade war from the United States.
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about the deficit. What's it actually going to be? Yeah. What are some of the other things that you're going to be looking for in the budget?
Well, I mean, the deficit is a big one. I don't expect the Prime Minister will announce what that number is tonight, but I think it's important that we keep that in mind, because this will be an explanation of why the deficit is what it is. Remember, they have already done some things for Canadians. They did make a tax cut before the summer, and they have made major announcements on other spending initiatives like defense and housing. But the Conservative leader is right that Canadians are still feeling an enormous amount of pressures, inflationary pressures, the cost of food prices. And so any sort of nod to that, I think, would be important in this speech, that Canadians are still not feeling perhaps the relief that they were hoping for. I also think it'll be important and interesting to hear if the Prime Minister does talk about the opposition parties. You're right, he met with all of the leaders now. I don't think Pierre Poilievre is going to get what he wants, because one of the things he wants is a much smaller deficit, $42 billion. But he does need a little bit of support, and I mean very little. He either needs a few people to vote for this budget or a few people to stay home and abstain. And so any kind of reach out that he might do in this budget would be important to watch for as well.
Let me ask you just quickly about the opposition. What do you make of the noise? Is it just noise that we're hearing right now? Is it, you're right, he doesn't need much, but he does need something. Yeah,
that's right. He needs something because he doesn't want to have another election right now. I think that is the general consensus from the people that I talk to. Specifically, the NDP doesn't have a permanent leader, so I don't think it's likely that they want an election. The Bloc Québécois has a lot of demands for the government as well. The Conservatives, I can't see a scenario where they support this budget. But again, he doesn't need a lot of people. So if he can get a few people to either agree to or just not show up on the budget voting day, that will be enough. I think it is important, though, to say that lots of things can change between now and November 4th. So I wouldn't put all my money on things going well, but I would put a lot of it on the government being able to survive this first budget vote.
Well, we're all talking about money tonight, so Rosie, thank you so much for that.
Sure,
we are going to check in with you again after the Prime Minister makes his remarks, so stick around.
Sounds
thank
good.
you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
And for now, we're going to get some more analysis ahead of this announcement with Mark Marison. He's the former Liberal National Campaign co-chair, principal at Burrard Strategy, joining us here in studio. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Big night for the Liberal Prime Minister.
Yes.
This speech, I was just talking to Rosie about it. The fact that he's making it, I don't know if it's so far in advance, but it's not till November 4th that the budget's happening. What do you make of the timing?
Well, it's called framing. I mean, he needs to get people prepared for the fact. I think this budget's going to be very significant. It's going to be the biggest deficit, one of the biggest deficits in the last 30 years. So Pierre Poilievre is going to be, he's going to not like that kind of deficit, and he's in a minority government. He's just a couple seats short of having majority government, and if he loses that vote, then we'd have an election. So it's a pretty big deal. So you've got to get people seeing what his long-term vision is early on.
I think it's true that Pierre Poilievre, the Conservatives, are not going to like a big deficit. There are going to be a lot of Canadians who are not going to like the sounds of a big deficit as well. As someone who has been involved with speech writing and working, sort of the inner workings of politics, what do you think needs to be communicated in tonight's speech to bring Canadians on side?
Well, to explain to people that when he's talked in the campaign about how he was going to spend less and invest more, I think that was the term, he's asked all of his ministers, François Champagne has asked all his ministers to come up with cuts for all of their budgets. So they're trying to get that down as much as they possibly can. But there's big expenses coming. One is defense. He's talked about getting it up to 5% over the next few years of the budget. That's a huge increase for Canada. And housing. Housing is a huge issue. And he's talking about a wartime effort on housing. So when you start hearing things like wartime effort, you know that there's going to be a deficit, and you know that there's going to be spending involved in these kinds of things. But this is what I think Carney would call investing.
Yeah, I think when we talk about an appetite for an election, for a lot of Canadians, and I think a lot of politicians too, it almost feels like that election just happened, and he hasn't actually been, in the chair for really that long. Though we do hear a lot of critique about the fact that some of the promises that were made back in the spring, which is not so long ago, have not materialized. Is he going to? Does he address that? To what end does he reiterate those promises, double down on them, explain it's only been, I don't know how many months, but what would you advise?
I think we're going to, of course we're going to find out shortly, but I would imagine that he's going to be making sure that people understand that there's a long-term vision here, and things can't get done overnight. Usually in the first year of any government, or first year somebody's an opposition leader, there's all kinds of interesting it takes a while to get used to being in government. This guy's never even been a politician before, and he's been leading this government pretty effectively. And I think actually Canadians are relatively patient about it, because you take a look at his personal approval numbers, they're double of what Poilievre's are. The Conservatives and Liberals are about equal, but his are way ahead. So if there was an election campaign right now, those leader numbers would pull things over to the Liberal Party. So I think it's going to be quite interesting how he manages all this.
There's no trade deal. I mean, that's the big thing that everybody, is sort of waiting for. How do you think Canadians feel about the fact that? Well,
I think people are frustrated, but I would think that Carney is frustrated. And I think if you were to ask Canadians who would actually get a trade deal for you, Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney, still 2-1 people would think that it would be Carney.
He doesn't have a majority. We've talked about this. Rosie was discussing it as well. It's shy of not very much. He doesn't need very much support here. But there has been, Steve McKinnon was expressing concerns that there might not be enough support to get the budget passed. Do you think it could be a problem?
You never know, because these things, there's always surprises in politics. In fact, you can count on surprises in politics. But I just can't imagine that the Conservatives would want to go into an election right now, especially given that they've got a leader that they've got to somehow figure out how to sell. And he's not changing, and you've got the NDP that's on life support. I just can't imagine anybody wanting to force an election right now. It'd be more likely that Mark Carney would win.
Let me ask you about the audience, because he's chosen to speak to university students in Ottawa tonight.
When you're talking about a long-term vision, who do you talk to? You talk to young people, because this is about their future, and they're the ones that are really concerned about things like housing. And those issues, people have been kicking that can down the road for too long, and now something's got to be done, and there's going to be a price tag to that.
Yeah, we're looking at a live shot right now. The crowd, those young people, are now filling into the auditorium waiting to hear from Mark Carney, and we're going to obviously go to him as soon as he does start speaking. Just a little bit more on that audience. You're talking about university students. You're right. If you want to talk about the future, that's who to go to. Those who we have spoken to, and we're going to touch base with one very soon, have seemed a little disillusioned about their future. What does he need to say to offer assurances to that younger generation that's feeling, I think, a little hopeless?
Well, yeah, no, I think that's going to be a very important message for young people, and it's also actually for everybody, because I think everybody's concerned about young people's future, not just young people. And he's going to be talking about his long-term vision for what he's got to do for financially for the country.
Mark Marison, thank you very much. You as well are going to stay in the studio with us and watch the Prime Minister's address, and then we're going to touch base with you a little afterward, get a little more analysis from you. Thank you very much. And now, as I mentioned, Prime Minister Mark Carney is going to be making his address to a group of university students. Youth unemployment rate, we know it's the highest it's been in over 2 decades, excluding the pandemic. Chantal Jovel Anos is a first-year student at the University of Toronto, and she joins me now. And Chantel, you have spoken to News Network before about your feelings about politics, and this is a great night to touch base with you now. Want to hear the kind of conversations that you and your friends have about what's going on in your lives and how politics affects it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different kinds of conversations, considering there's a lot of concern about how the government has been looking at the youth specifically, considering that he was voted in with the intention of wanting to spark this huge change for a lot of young people. But what we're seeing now is that a lot of people are kind of feeling uncertain with how he's been going about his financial policies, considering issues like finding minimum wage jobs or being able to afford any kind of housing has been something that's a real struggle and has not really seen a lot of significant change.
Yeah, I was just talking to Mark about this. I mean, on one hand, Mark Carney was elected fairly recently, but I can understand that in a life of a 20-something who is, as you say, struggling with things like unemployment, not every month, every week, every day really counts. How are young people struggling right now? How are what are the sort of things that you and your friends are dealing with?
Well, there's a lot of different kinds of struggles. I mean, even when you want to go for a simple night out, it's a lot more complicated because there's a lot more expenses that we have to deal with. As you probably hear from a lot of young people, a lot of things are way more expensive. So it's really inaccessible to try and do things that, for example, paying for Presto or going to see any kind of new TV show or any kind of live show. There's a lot of struggle when it comes to kind of balancing just your day-to-day life when you also have to look at things really seriously when you want to save up for wanting to move into a new place. And considering even now that it's hard to just get a basic job, people are really also looking towards just kind of what kind of different outlets they can make for money.
And now you're going to university. I mentioned that off the top. University is a place where you're hopefully training for that career that's ahead. How do you feel about that? Do you feel hopeful? Do you feel like this is going to be a bigger challenge than maybe you thought going in?
Well, I mean, there's two sides of it. I mean, university, especially the university I go to, University of Toronto, can be really hard and it has that reputation. So there definitely is a little bit of that struggle, and also having to deal with being a working student. I think that's also something that is definitely original to a lot of kids nowadays, because you can't just go to university and have your title be a student. You also sometimes have to get a job, and you also have to make sure that you balance your social life. So there's a lot more difficulties with that, because you're not just worrying about your education and competing with a lot of students, because there's a lot of international students too, but also having to keep in mind of your own well-being and also trying to pay for groceries and that kind of thing.
Right, and finding that job to have while you're in university, that's the challenge, as you say. We are right now minutes away from hearing from the Prime Minister. What do you want to hear from him?
Well, I think the biggest thing is I want to hear some kind of plan and some kind of practicality, especially when it comes to dealing with young people in our future. It's really scary right now with what's going on in the U.S., with all these big policies, all these big issues that are going on. The reason why young people voted for Carney is because they wanted someone who could be that change, who could stand up and actually do things and follow through on his promises. So I think making sure that he addresses a lot of those issues, like finding minimum wage jobs, making sure that housing is affordable for a lot of young people, that is what we're really looking for to give us that hope for the future.
Chantel, you talk about, I just want to follow up here, you talk about young people voting for Mark Carney. This is a budget that needs to pass. He's going to need support from other parties, or it perhaps doesn't, and we end up going to an election. Seems unlikely, but could happen. And if that were to happen, how would you vote?
Well, I can't really say right now, but I'd hope to vote for Carney again, considering if he does kind of go for a lot of things that are really relevant to those kinds of liberal issues. But that could change depending on how we see his plans go, and especially of how his future plans go with those kinds of financial issues.
Chantel Jovellanos, a first-year university student at the University of Toronto. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
My next guest works in the auto sector, and he's worried about the future of that industry, which we know has been struggling with U.S. tariffs. Derek Gungle is joining us from Windsor, Ontario, and he is an auto worker at the Stellantis Windsor assembly plant. Derek, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me on.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly? I just want to make sure.
Yes, you did.
Okay, great. Derek, the situation, I mean, we talk about the auto sector so much these days, but what does the situation look like for you and your colleagues right now, given that times are pretty uncertain?
It's a little strange right now. In Windsor, we're adding a third shift, so it gives this false sense of security that things are going well. But at the same time, within the last week, we've had 2 losses of products within our industry, Brampton Assembly Plant in Brampton, Ontario, and the Cami plant in Ingersoll, Ontario has lost a product as well. So it's just a massive uncertainty in this time, and we don't know how things look going forward.
Derek, what do you and your colleagues, when you are on a break, what are people saying in terms of that uncertainty?
It's very stressful. I mean, not just for us in the auto industry, but the community at large. You know, the economic spin-off from a single auto assembly job, it really impacts the community. I think the stats are something like 1 in 10. So for every 1 auto assembly job, that supports 10 other jobs in the community, and not just suppliers. Heck, even when I go and see my barber, he's asking me if we have any layoff weeks coming up, because it affects his business. It affects everyone in this community.
So Mark Carney is going to give a speech, as we know, really just a couple of more minutes to go, and we're going to carry that live. But what kind of message are you hoping he's going to deliver? What are you going to be listening for?
I want to hear what we're actually going to be talking about for auto. You know, the agreements that we had in place, we're dealing with an illegal, unjust violation of the free trade agreement currently. This is actually an attack on our industry, our community. You know, and I'd love to see him talking about how he's going to respond with aid to our community, not just you know, aiding workers and retraining them for other things. These are good paying jobs that are, and we're a highly skilled workforce. But at the same time, we need to start talking about better policies. These auto industries owe it to Canadians. You know, hardworking people's tax dollars went to pay for some retooling and to bail them out 15, 20 years ago. So, I mean, we need some better policies that surround it, that we're not just handing out money willy-nilly, and we need some solution, like a national auto strategy, so we're not caught off guard and constantly fighting off of our heels.
Are you hopeful for your sector, the Canadian auto sector, and the future, given what you're dealing with right now?
I'm highly concerned. You know, every time he's gone and met with other leaders, we're not talking about deals. Which at the same time, right now, no deal is better than a bad deal. So I'm grateful that we're not signing a bad deal at this moment. But at the same time, we just had 2 plants lose products in the last week, and this is clearly an attack on our entire industry, and it's very concerning. I mean, our industry can't afford to lose more jobs in an ever shrinking automotive footprint.
I take your point, no deal is better than a bad deal. But how do you feel about the fact that there is no deal? I know there were a lot of hopes and a lot of, I don't know, promises, but talk about making there be a deal, and it's obviously a difficult one to try and get to. I think everyone can acknowledge that. But had you thought back at election time, when the vote came in and Mark Carney was elected, that we might, in fact, have a deal at this point?
Uncertain, because truth be told, we have a deal in place. You know, it was in fact this administration back in 2019, 2020, the U.S. administration, I mean, that signed a free trade agreement with us, that they have their signature on that agreement, and they've gone back on that agreement. So at the same time, you know, that agreement doesn't seem like it's living up to its promises and expectations. As I mentioned before, this is an illegal, unjust violation of that trade agreement that they signed. So why would we hand over more things and give them a better deal for them when we're not securing anything in return?
Perspective, and I think a lot of Canadians, you know, as much as they might be struggling, their minds do go to the auto sector when we talk about the economy and what's going on right now. So I really appreciate the conversation. Derek Gungle is an auto worker at the Stellantis assembly plant, joining us from Windsor, Ontario. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, once again, a live look for you of Ottawa. That is where Prime Minister Mark Carney is set to speak. It's going to happen very soon now. He's going to be addressing a group of university students about his government's plans for the budget. You can see that room is filling up, and it's primarily filling up with young people. That is who is filling out that audience. Carney is due to speak at 7:30 Eastern. The government will table its budget early November 4th. Tonight, we'll hear a bit of a preview to it, and for that, we're going to bring you that speech live as it starts. And I want to bring Mark Marison back in because, of course, he is hanging out with us tonight, waiting to hear from Mark Carney. Very much anticipated speech, despite the fact that we are, I don't know the exact, like we're 2 weeks, not quite 2 weeks, maybe away from the actual budget. It seems a little far out. You were talking last we spoke about the fact that he needs to set the stage. How big a challenge is that for him, given the, we've heard from guests here, a student, an auto worker here, they are frustrated. They do want to hear something, they want to hear some good news and some tangible promises made. So what kind of challenge does Mark Carney face tonight?
Well, I don't think he's going to be making a lot of detailed, tangible promises today, but he'll be setting the stage for what he will be promising in the budget 2 weeks from now. And the important thing is for people to understand the fact that the deficit's going to be bigger, but that they're going to be investing in very important things to people, especially to young people, and that's housing, infrastructure, and then defense. Well, that's important to all of our allies, and it's important to everybody.
Why? Let's talk about defense, actually, because yes, it is important to our allies. The average Canadian who is frustrated with the economy and frustrated with cost of living right now, when they hear there's going to be potentially more defense spending, why should they feel like that's a good thing?
Well, I think that people have got a little bit of a scare this year when they heard from Donald Trump that he was talking about making Canada a 51st state and was talking about the fact that we sort of are free riders off of the United States. And a lot of Canadians, I think, are realizing that we've got to stand on our own 2 feet, and that's going to take some sacrifice to get there, but that's pretty important.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean? I mean, this is obviously he's a renowned, financial wizard globally. Mark Carney explaining this deficit to Canadians a lot. We'll be watching tonight. What do you make of the way he communicates what the finances are and how people can understand things like, a growing deficit? It will, a very big number might sound a bit scary to people.
It might sound scary to people, but I think that the issue of being orthodox about deficits was pretty much a few decades ago. And Canada is, as a G7 country, we have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. The head of the IMF said that there's room in for us to be able to have a deficit in this budget, and so I'm not too concerned about it. You don't want to have deficits like this forever, but you definitely need to, at times like this, you got to spend some money.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we were talking about this in terms of whether the budget, is going to face any kind of a hurdle? And we know he met with the opposition leaders of the various parties today. And yes, it does seem that they probably don't have an appetite for going to an election. But to what end is he actually reaching or managed to actually successfully secure those friendships come November 4th, do you think? Or are we all, everybody's going to be watching what he says here, and how important is it that he say things that the other parties might want to hear?
Well, I think if he had the support, enough support already to win this budget, then he probably wouldn't have to be putting on as big a communications plan for this whole thing, a roadshow, so to speak, because he's starting 2 weeks early. So there are concerns about that. But the fact is, by the time, I'm sorry, now I've lost my train of thought.
No. Yeah, well, I was just saying, the other party leaders, Pierre Poilievre, I guess we're not quite sure, the NDP, what does he have to say? Are the things tonight that he's got to say?
I don't think you're going to get Pierre Poilievre to agree with you on anything. The NDP is going to make some kinds of demands, and we've seen that the Bloc has been pretty critical of things. So if you listen to them, you'd think that all of them would get together and vote against the budget. But if they do vote against the budget, that's like setting off a bomb, and it's much more likely, given how we see how popular Carney still is compared to Pierre Poilievre, that Carney would win that election. So it would be in the interest of Carney to actually have an election. But I have a feeling that Carney actually enjoys government a lot more than campaigning. I think he's that kind of person that wants to do a really good job here. So I don't think he's going to be forcing an election.
Now, given what you know of politics, then when we listen to the other party leaders, is this bluster? Is this noise? Is this performance? I mean, you're sort of framing it, and you do have ties to the long ties to the Liberal Party, but do you suspect that they wouldn't make good on, I don't know that they're threats necessarily, but it's certainly talking like they, as you say, aren't very supportive?
I think people will try to keep the drama going all the way up until the day of the vote on the budget, and I don't think you're going to know exactly what's going to happen until that day. And everybody wants it to be that way because that maximizes their leverage and what they're trying to do.
Yeah. So, and since we are 2 weeks out, Rosemary was saying that part of the reason for the timing of this is that he's going to the APEC summit and he's going to be out of the country for a period of time. So, got to get this conversation started early. Also, there's the idea that, you know, we don't know what the deficit is going to be, but there are indications it's going to be larger than people feel like initially they might be comfortable with, and he's got to kind of get people comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But in your experience, have you seen in the lead up to a budget such a sort of long runway to it in terms of that conversation?
They've been starting to do this more and more lately because of the fact that it's all about being able to frame your message and so people can be ready for what it is that you're doing. And because most of these things have to be talked about in like an elevator sort of pitch kind of a way. And if you don't do it early enough, people are just, if you just spring something on people, that's when a lot of opposition can arise.
And the kind of, you know, the kind of speech that we see Mark Carney give, these are not, like, he's not, I wouldn't suggest a soundbite prime minister, really. Like,
Though he's doing pretty good ones.
Is he?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I find that his, it's a thoughtful and more, he's willing to take the time, it seems, to explain. Whether or not he's going to hold the attention of the audience, I don't know. So you're saying he's got some pretty good sound bites, but what do you make of his style?
What I meant, I guess, was that he doesn't sound like he's sloganeering, and that he sounds authentic because he's actually explaining things in a real way. And I think that there's a huge appetite for that. And that's in stark contrast to the communication style that you see from Pierre Poilievre, who is all slogans and really doesn't get into depth on almost anything.
So he's got a young audience, and we were talking about this and the kinds of things that they want to, oh, you know what, actually, I can just see here, we've got Mark Carney is coming out to the podium. So you're off the hook, but just for a few minutes, maybe 30 or so, we're going to listen to the Prime Minister and talk to you after.
Thanks.
Thank you. Here is Mark Carney.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Madame Fortier. Merci, cher Mona. Merci, Madame la Présidente. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici parmi vous. Good evening. Look, it's been a while since I was in your shoes at university. It's been a long while, actually. It's been a long while, but one of the things is that there are some similarities to our experiences. Okay? Trust me, I'm going to draw them out. The fact is, in particular, we will have both studied and entered the workforce. You will soon enter the workforce during times of immense change. Okay? And I've learned a few things since I graduated, and I've increasingly understood this point that, you know, life doesn't proceed in a straight line. And that the history and the progress of nations are punctuated by hinge moments. Times when the future literally hangs in the balance, and when our actions can be decisive. Et dans des moments comme celui-ci, nous devons être audacieux. Il faut tracer une nouvelle voie, et il faut le faire ensemble. Le Canada traverse un moment comme celui-là aujourd'hui. Les changements technologiques s'accélèrent. The world is more dangerous and divided. The U.S., as we all know, has fundamentally changed its approach to trade. It's raising its tariffs to levels last seen during the Great Depression. And the scale and the speed of these developments are not part of a smooth transition, they're a rupture. And they mean that our economic strategy needs to change dramatically. And they mean as well, even though we both lived through time, or I lived through times of immense change, your future will not be the same as my past. Because my time as a student was marked by events of a similar magnitude, but in a very different direction. When I was your age, the Berlin Wall fell.
leading to a long period of liberalization of the movement of goods, capital, and people, leading to a peace dividend. C'était une époque d'optimisme, d'espoir et de promesses. Et ces dynamiques favorisaient particulièrement le Canada.
Notre géographie enviable nous donnait l'accès à la plus vaste et à la plus dynamique des économies et nous tenait à distance de la plupart des guerres et des attentats terroristes qui ont eu lieu. So, because of these advantages, over decades our economy grew steadily more integrated with the United States through the Free Trade Agreement of the 1980s, the NAFTA Accord of the 1990s, and eventually USMCA agreement signed in 2018. Canada's trade increased by over 400% during that period, and our economy doubled in size. But this process, this decades-long process of an ever closer economic relationship with the United States, is now over. And as a consequence, many of our former strengths as a country, former strengths more particularly as our economy, strengths based on close ties to America, have become our vulnerabilities. And as a result of that, the jobs of workers in our industries most affected by the US tariffs in autos and steel and lumber are under threat. And our businesses are holding back investments restrained by the pall of uncertainty that's hanging over all of us. Our relationship with the United States will never again be the same as it was, even though in this new world of protectionism, we have the best trade deal of any other country, and we're working to make it even better still. Now, at the same time that all of this is happening, technology is changing the way we work, live, and communicate. When I was in graduate school, the World Wide Web, as we then called it, was that was the modern term of the information superhighway, if you ever heard of that. The World Wide Web, as we then called it, was just beginning. We used pen and paper in class. We talked on the telephone to each other. And we talked about the same news stories, the same movies, the same bands. My generation was connected by wires, yours is connected by code, and yet our society today is becoming ever more disconnected. Our public square is fragmented by online echo chambers, where truth and fiction can be hard to tell apart, and where contrasting ideas tend to polarize, not persuade. Now, in the context of all this, we have relearned some key lessons over the course of the past year. First, we have to take care of ourselves because we can't rely on one foreign partner. We have to take care of each other because we are stronger together. And we've learned that now is not the time to be cautious because fortune favors the bold. Nous pouvons nous donner beaucoup plus que d'autres ne pourront jamais nous prendre.
Than others could ever take from us. We are masters in our own home. Canadians will decide what happens here.
It's your future. And we are going to give it back to you. Now, to confront a more dynamic, a more competitive, a more hostile world, we must chart a new course, drawing on our many strengths as a country, relying on our values, and being inspired by our history.
First, on strengths, Canada has what the world wants. Nous sommes bordés par trois océans.
We are bordered by 3 oceans, and we are the only country to have reached trade agreements with each of the G7 economies, offering our businesses unequaled access to global
We're an
markets.
energy superpower. We start with the 3rd largest reserves of oil, the 4th largest of natural gas. We have a electricity grid that is 85% clean, and we have the vast potential to power the clean economy of the future. We possess one of the largest resources of critical minerals and rare earths. Le Canada est un chef de file.
Canada is a leader in artificial intelligence, life sciences, and quantum computing. Our universities are among the best in the world. Their scientists are among the most cited, and they attract and train the best talent.
Our government has the fiscal capacity to act decisively, and we must draw on these strengths now. Our second advantage is that Canada has the values to which the world aspires. Canada has always been, and we always will be, committed to fundamental human rights, to human dignity, and to individual freedom. We are a pluralistic society. Our cities are the most diverse in the world, places where people bring the best of their cultures. We have a public square that's loud, that's diverse and free. Et les Canadiens et Canadiennes valorisent la collaboration
And Canadians value collaboration and partnership, and we are determined to build a sustainable future. These deeply held values are also economic assets. They give investors the confidence to build here. They offer innovators a stable foundation to take risks here. They give the world reasons to trust Canadians as reliable partners. The history of Canada is filled with adventurers, risk-takers, and builders. Over the centuries, in order to succeed and prosper, we have had to go further, build faster, and dream bigger. It is important to remember that the Canada before Confederation was built through bold action and risk-taking.
Coureurs de bois and voyageurs who mapped this continent and built vast trading networks from coast to coast to coast before the Americans had even left St. Louis. When the Second World War ended, Canada was ambitious, determined, and united in a mission to build big things. The St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway, Expo 67, the CN Tower. Nous avons construit de nouveaux quartiers pour des centaines de milliers.
We built new neighborhoods for hundreds of thousands of veterans and their families, and opened new universities to launch their careers. We had the sense that we were in control of our future.
We used to build things in this country. We can build again. We used to explore this country. We can chart new courses again. We used to take big, bold risks in this country. It is time to swing for the fences again. We learned a little lesson about swinging for the fences a couple nights ago, as I recall. And this is what the upcoming budget will be about: building, taking control, and winning. We will make generational investments with a plan to protect our communities, our borders, our way of life. We will build a stronger economy where everyone has a chance to get ahead. And we will empower Canadians with new opportunities, better careers, and a lower cost of living. Now, let me start with protection, because to build more of what we need, we must protect what we have. Safe communities attract people and families to put down roots, get a home, build a rewarding career, and ensure their children get a good education. So as soon as Parliament opened in the spring, We introduced the strongest legislation in Canadian history to secure our borders and crack down on gun trafficking and illegal drugs such as fentanyl. We introduced new legislation to combat the horrifying rise in hate and violent intimidation, including to protect against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And as I shared last week, we will table legislation for stricter bail and sentencing laws. To help secure our communities, we're hiring 1,000 new RCMP personnel, and to secure our borders, we're hiring 1,000 new border services officers. As we build safer streets and stronger borders, we also must reinforce our sovereignty in that more dangerous and divided world. And that's why Canada's new government is undertaking the largest increase in defense spending in a generation, or in generations to be more precise. And we're forging new partnerships with allies, such as the European Union, to strengthen our shared security. Parce que vous méritez un foyer sûr.
Because you deserve a safe home. Because you deserve to feel safe in your community. Because we are defending Canada's sovereignty, and because there is no prosperity without security.
But look, protection is not enough. We have to build, and our plan to build, first and foremost, is here at home so we can take control of our future and, as I said, give you back yours. In the last 6 months, we've worked to create the right conditions to get big things built faster. At the end of June, we passed the One Canadian Economy Act to remove federal barriers to internal trade and to fast-track the approval of nation-building projects. In August, we opened the Major Projects Office, which serves as a single point of contact to get those nation-building projects built faster. Des projets qui vont connecter, vont diversifier.
Projects that will connect us, diversify our economy, and propel us forward. Projects that will export our resources to new partners around the world. Projects that will create hundreds of thousands of well-paid jobs. Good unionized jobs for Canadian workers.
Now, last month, we announced the first tranche, the first group of these major projects, with over $60 billion of investments in nuclear power, in LNG, in carbon capture, in critical minerals, and in new trade corridors. And we outlined strategies from offshore wind to high-speed rail and a sovereign cloud to drive hundreds of billions in further investment, all while creating the conditions for a better connected, more productive, and more ambitious country. And the thing is, we are just getting started. Our next tranche of nation-building projects will be announced by the Grey Cup. After the World Series, but by the Grey Cup. Yeah. And at the core of our strategy will be to catalyze unprecedented investments in Canada over the next 5 years. That's what's going to come above and beyond these projects.
Because we are also focused on building millions of new homes that will strengthen our communities, building faster with Canadian technology, Canadian workers, Canadian lumber, and Canadian steel, building homes that Canadians can really afford.
We launched Build Canada Homes here in Ottawa to help double the pace of housing construction within a decade using new factory technology, cutting building times by 50%, reducing costs by 20%, and lowering emissions by 20%. Now, it's not just what we build, it's also how we build. We will build inclusively in full partnership with Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, every step of the way. We will build in solidarity with workers, creating good union jobs. And Budget 2025 will introduce our climate competitiveness strategy. With a focus on results over objectives, on investments over prohibition, we will build sustainably. Le budget va contenir une nouvelle stratégie.
The budget will introduce a new strategy to build sustainably and competitively for the future of Canada. We will be focused on results rather than objectives, on investments rather than prohibitions. We will build sustainably by relying on energy, transportation, housing, and low-emission manufacturing to enhance our competitiveness, because reducing emissions is not only a moral duty, it is also an economic imperative.
Our strategy will recognize that in today's global economy, we have to build sustainably. It's not just a moral duty, it's also an economic imperative. It is a moral duty, but it's an economic imperative. Now, above all, we will build Canadian. The new security threats the world is bringing to our shores means we're making the biggest investments in our military in generations. But up until now, more than 70 cents of every dollar of military spending, military capital expending by our government goes to the United States. With our new Defense Investment Agency, we will make sure we build more of our security and defense capabilities here at home, creating new careers in aerospace and shipbuilding and cyber and AI for Canadian engineers, technicians, and scientists. It's the same thing in steel. Consider that while 80% of the steel that Europe buys is manufactured in Europe, 75% of the steel that the U.S. buys is manufactured in the U.S. Only 40% of the steel that we use is made here. That doesn't make sense. Not when we have the people, the resources, and the companies to build right here in Canada. So our upcoming budget will move forward with our Buy Canadian policy, prioritizing Canadian steel, aluminum, lumber, manufactured good, and technology for Canadian projects. And with new orders for homes, infrastructure, and defense equipment becoming orders for Canadian suppliers. We will be our own best customer. So the welder who's working on a contract in St. John's can get a full-time job. Et pour qu'un ingénieur de l'Université d'Ottawa
And so that an engineer from the University of Ottawa has the great career right here in Canada.
Around the world are already taking note of new Canadian ambition. Last month, we signed a historic free trade deal with Indonesia, the world's fourth largest country by population. We've just signed foundational agreements with the United Arab Emirates in AI, and with the EU in defense and trade, and with Germany in critical minerals. We're re-engaging with global giants India and China while we deepen our partnerships with our traditional allies. And to build on this momentum, I'm going to put it in context. Our goal for Canada is to double our non-US exports over the course of the next decade, generating more than $300 billion more in trade, and that's new orders for Canadian resources, technologies, and expertise. Now, you spoke of protection and building, you move to empowering. Each of you in this room and in the overflow room, each of you is here to get an education that you need to go out and build the future that you want. To be empowered with a better shot at the life you want for yourself and your family. We will keep building a country where more people have more of those opportunities. Nous continuerons de soutenir les plus vulnérables.
We will continue to support the most vulnerable and offer respite to those who are struggling by building a country where life is affordable. That is the third goal of our plan, giving all Canadians the means to succeed.
We start by lowering costs with programs and services that provide strong foundations for a good life. So the first thing that we did, the absolute first thing we did after the election, was to cut taxes for all Canadians who pay tax, delivering tax savings for more than 22 million Canadians. We cut taxes to reduce the cost of housing for first-time homebuyers, some of whom I hope are in this room, immediately making the goal of home ownership a reality for more Canadians with young families. All of the big projects that we're driving forward from new housing and new ports and clean energy will create high-paying careers, many of them union careers here in Canada. It will be a great time to be in the trades. But as well, in the budget, we will unlock new apprenticeships, new skills training programs, and a new talent strategy for the next generation of scientists and innovators who will build our country. And as we build new industries and create new markets, you will be equipped with the skills you need to succeed with those opportunities. Because when Canadians empower each other, everyone benefits, and Canada prospers. Pour saisir ce moment. Vas-y. Pour saisir ce moment charnière.
To seize the opportunities offered by this pivotal moment, we must make difficult decisions. We must change the way government operates, spending less so that Canadians invest more, build our country, and create better careers.
The upcoming budget will balance the operating deficit in 3 years by reducing wasteful government spending and doing more with less. See, the fact is that federal spending has been growing over the course of the last decade by more than 7% year over year. We've been spending faster than our economy was growing. So we have to change that, and our government is changing that. As one example, we just completed a 60-day red tape review that identified nearly 500 new ways to streamline government services, cut duplication, and reduce costs. And when we saw that Canada Post was losing $10 million a day, Madam President, would you like to have $10 million a day? Imagine what you could do for the university with $10 million a day. Canada Post losing $10 million a day. We made responsible choices. But the fact is, even with such efficiencies and with better management, we will have to do less of some of the things that we want to do so we can do more of what we must do to build a bigger and better Canada. Ce budget va protéger les programmes essentiels.
This budget will protect the critical programs that give every Canadian a real chance to get ahead. We will protect the Canadian Dental Care Program that now allows more than 5 million Canadians to access affordable dental care. And we will make the National School Food Program permanent, a program that allows 400,000 children to receive a healthy meal every single day.
We will protect the National Child Care Program for the over 900,000 children who are getting a strong start that they deserve, and for their parents who no longer have to choose between raising a family and keeping their careers. And as well, our budget will also bring in automatic federal benefits so that the millions of low-income Canadians who aren't part of the system can get the support that they need. Now, we need to be clear-eyed about where we stand today so we can build for tomorrow. Let me give the current economic context. I'm channeling my old central banker days here. Look, the situation in Canada now, the actual situation, is that the rate of inflation has come down. It's come down sharply. But it's also the case that the cost of living is still far too high. It's also the situation in Canada right now that we're building a lot more homes. Housing starts are up this year. And affordability of those houses are improving. But it's still challenging. We need to build many, many more homes, and we need to build them a lot faster. This government is getting immigration under control, with asylum claims down by 1/3 and new temporary foreign workers down by more than 70% this year. To match immigration levels with our needs and our capacity to welcome them, this budget will include Canada's new immigration plan to do better for newcomers and for everyone. It's also the fact that in this economy, we are creating jobs as a whole across it. And it is a fact that we are forecast to be the second fastest growing economy in the G7 over the course of the next 2 years. Even though some critical sectors, I mentioned earlier, autos, steel, lumber, forest products, aluminum, and some regions are facing big pressures. So the facts are that at present, despite everything, despite these big changes, our economy is holding up. But it's equally true that if we don't act now, these pressures will only grow. And more fundamentally, our goal is not just to do reasonably well, but to grow stronger than the rest of the G7. And as we work to do so, I want to make this promise to Canadians. I will always be straight about the challenges that we face and the choices that we must make. And to be clear, we won't transform our economy easily or in a few months. It will take some sacrifices, and it will take some time. Our government will work relentlessly to cut waste and drive efficiencies. And when we have to make difficult choices, we will be thoughtful, we'll be transparent, and we'll be fair. We will work collaboratively with our colleagues across the aisle to build, protect, and empower Canadians. We won't play games. We won't waste time. And we won't hold back. We will do what it takes. We will play to win. We will bet on Canada and all Canadians. Je fais cette promesse aux Canadiens.
This is my promise to Canadians. I will always be clear with Canadians about the challenges we must face and the choices we have to make. The transformation of our economy will not happen easily or in a few months. It will require sacrifices, and it will take some time. Our government will work tirelessly to eliminate waste and enhance efficiency. And when we must make difficult choices, we will do so with thoughtfulness and all transparency. We will work collaboratively with our colleagues from all the parties to build, protect, and empower Canadians. We will not play games, and we won't waste time. We won't hold back. We will do whatever it takes, because we will play to win, and we will bet on Canada and on all Canadians. It is our country. It's your future. We will give you that control.
And to finish, because we're all in this together, I ask you to get involved. The fact you're here this evening, you can be doing many other things, shows that you're interested in being involved. Get involved. Look out for each other. Look after each other. I know from the history that I read in university and the history that I've lived since graduating that fortune truly does favor the bold, and the hinge of fate will turn on what Canada does right now. We're going to have to change how we do some things, but we will never change who we are. This moment has revealed, yes, the limits to our economic independence, limits that we must tackle head on, and we will. But more importantly, what it's revealed is a nation that's more determined, generous, hardworking, compassionate, and ambitious than any other on earth. We are Canada strong, Canada fort. Vive le Canada.
listening to Prime Minister Mark Carney there in Ottawa, speaking to a group of university students in advance of the November 4th budget day. And what we heard him say there, he talked a bit about his own university experience, relating to them about how when he was in university, there was the World Wide Web. And now, of course, students communicate very differently. And among the other differences, the challenges that those students are facing. It wasn't all about the demographic there in the room, but near the end, he certainly talked to them about the challenges they face and encouraging them, you heard him say, to be bold and to, as well, know that there are some promises, including investment in trades, and saying that this will be a good time to be in the trades because while there are difficult decisions to come, there are bold decisions going to be made, and they will become evident November 4th on Budget Day. I want to bring in our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, who has also been listening in to the Prime Minister. Rosemary, there was a lot there. He covered a lot of ground. A number of things stood out to me, but I'm very interested to hear what stood out to you.
Yeah, I mean, these are very familiar themes for anyone that listened to the Prime Minister through the election campaign. But there are a couple of things that did stand out for me. First of all, really painting a picture of the moment that Canada is in, faced with, of course, the trade war by the United States and a relationship that has changed fundamentally. Also saying that Canada can no longer be a country that relies on one trading partner. So that need to diversify that he has talked about before. And then some of the ways he went through some of the things that the government has already put in motion to try and deal with that. Recognizing there are, of course, sectoral tariffs, and that still has to happen. But whether it be investment in housing or the defense industry or other measures that they will be taking, you hinted at some there in the budget. That was sort of the part about how the strategy is working now. He did also say, I should say, that he is setting an ambitious goal for Canada to double non-U.S. exports in the next decade. To give you a sense of how dramatically he wants to change our dependence on the United States, he's now put a target on it, which is pretty interesting. But the vast majority of the message, I think, really came at the end of the speech, when that was about preparing for Canadians. That's why this speech was happening, not just to remind you of what his government has done, but to prepare you for what is to come. He did recognize that while inflation has come down, that the cost of living is still too high. He also recognized that in spite of some of the challenges he laid out, the economy is still holding up. But he said that is why Canada needs to act now to make some changes. And then he went on, and this is an important part, I think, Sarah, to say that he would be straight about the challenges we are facing, saying that the economy cannot be transformed overnight, and indeed that's sort of the political reality that he might be faced with, and that sacrifices will be needed and that they are going to take time. The sacrifices there that we're talking about will come, I think, in cuts, and what Canada, and this was something he alluded to as well, what Canada will have to live with less of, even though it might be something that the country wants to do. To me, those were sort of the key messages were at the end. You know, trying to reassure Canadians of the things the government is working on the strength of the Canadian economy. He believes the ongoing strength of the Canadian economy, because certainly there's lots of signs of a slowing and weakening economy, and then the reality of some of the things that are going to have to be done, whether that come in the form of cuts to public services and to the public sector, or in the kind of transformation that he's talking about that is not going to happen quickly, and that Canadians will have to be a little bit patient with how the government moves forward. There was nothing, earth-shattering in here. I should also say that. So I think that's why when we're talking about it, it is really about laying the groundwork for Canadians to start thinking about a budget that is going to be perhaps very different than what they've seen over the past decade, certainly.
Can I ask you, the other thing that stuck out to me when he was talking about the deficit, and we were talking about this before the speech, we don't know what that deficit is going to be.
Right.
There are projections that are out there, but he also did say I felt like it was a promise that that deficit would be balanced in 3 years, and the way to do that was by reducing government spending and streamlining government. And then he went on to make a very sort of specific example of how they are already in that process, talking about the choices made, responsible choices, he called them, about Canada Post. And I immediately imagined if I'm a Canada Post worker and how, when we talk about, he sort of alluded to the, there could be some pain, the sacrifices that will need to be made, how that really sits with those who are experiencing it maybe already.
Yeah, it's important to realize that when he's talking about balancing the deficit, he's actually only talking about a portion of the deficit. He's talking about the operating deficit, which he says is going to happen over 3 years. So that will be done by either getting rid of jobs in the public service, attrition in the public service, or potentially a loss of services. The capital investment budget, because this is the way the government has now will now be dividing up the budget, is where you're going to see the big spending, because that's the place where they are hoping to invest in order to grow. So the deficit will not be, I wouldn't think, balanced on that edge of the side of the ledger in 3 years, if we are talking about a magnitude of what we've been saying, between $65 to $100 billion in deficit. So that's the first piece there. But you're right that he does sort of lay out some of the places where he believes that there are already efficiencies to come. Canada Post still in a labor dispute, but that would be one of them, as a need to change the way that Crown Corporation operates. But that's also where he made that line. He says, even with such efficiencies and better management, we will have to do less of some of the things we want to do so we can do more of what we must do to build a bigger, better Canada. And I guess my question as a Canadian would be, okay, but how long do I have to live with less in order to get to the promise that you are putting on the table? And how will that help me in the immediate? And I would imagine that is, sort of what the opposition parties will seize on as well. For people who don't have a job right now, particularly a lot of young Canadians, and for people who are struggling to buy groceries, this is a promise of change in the future, not immediate relief. Of course, there was a tax cut that was made before the summer started, but that didn't affect everybody in the same way. So how is this promise going to affect people immediately? And I think the answer is it's not. You're going to have to wait to see the long-term payoff, that this will result in a stronger economy, a growing economy, and eventually higher wages, but with sacrifices that will have to be made until we get to that point, if it works.
Rosemary, invaluable to have you here listening along with all of that insight. I really appreciate it. CBC News Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton, thank you. Okay, I now want to bring back Chantal Jovellanos. She is a first-year university student at the University of Toronto. And Chantal, we of course spoke to you in the lead up to this, and you talked about the struggle that you and your colleagues, your fellow students, face in terms of the challenges, affordability for sure, housing another, and cost of living, trying to have an enjoyable, balanced life as a university student, while at the same time hopefully working a job because you need to. Of course, there aren't that many jobs to be found. I think that sums up our earlier conversation. What I'd like to know now is, in listening to that speech, what did you hear, and was it what you hoped to hear?
Well, there was definitely a combination of things. On one hand, I am glad that he really addressed how a lot of students are dealing with a lot of issues, like considering the contrast of inflation and also the cost of living. There was a lot of talk of promises on housing and affordability, which were the things that I previously discussed. But I think on the other hand, too, I think it's really concerning to also hear about the possible cuts that could be happening. And even though he did talk about transparency, there still is a lot of questions on what that would even entail in terms of our day-to-day lives. And even for students like me who, like you mentioned, are looking for jobs, who want jobs, like right now, we want to move out right now. We want to get money right now. And if these are things that are going to happen in the long term, are these really things that are going to be beneficial in my life in the next coming years?
I have time for one more question, Chantal, so I want to ask you. And one of the things he said is, it's your future, and we're going to give it back to you. And in talking about military spending, he made the connection to the jobs that could potentially come of that, and saying, you know, giving an example of an engineer student in Ottawa having a great career in Canada, talking about how it's going to be a great time to be in the trades. As a student, and I don't know what program you're in, but do you think young people listening to that, it sort of shapes decisions that they might be making, knowing where the government might be going?
I think it's definitely something that people, especially young people, are considering right now, is where the industry is going. I mean, if there's a lot of focus on like military efforts and trade efforts, I definitely see a lot of people going in that direction. But for a lot of people especially, that's not really what we want per se. What we want is jobs that aren't so focused on the military, aren't so focused on the US. People want jobs that can benefit their lives in their own particular way. And I do appreciate that there is some jobs that are coming from this, but I do think that that does raise a lot of questions about how this will go long term, because people don't want to just go and deal with those kinds of issues.
Chantal Jovalanos, first-year university student at the University of Toronto. It was great to have you speaking with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk a little more about the economy and what this might signal. Pedro Antunes is a chief economist at the Conference Board of Canada and joins me now. Pedro, it's good to have you on the show. I assume you were also listening to what Mark Carney had to say there. Did today's speech reveal to you things you maybe didn't know about the budget, what more to expect come November 4th?
Well, I don't think there was a whole lot new. I think there's a few messages that we keep hearing about. I didn't hear a lot about productivity and enticing private investment and competing with the U.S. and the challenges that we have with the U.S. changes in their own tax regimes, corporate tax in particular. So I'm a little concerned about how much that the budget will, in the end, deal with this kind of productivity issue that we've been struggling with in Canada for years now.
Rosemary did point out his talk about trade deals and negotiations with countries outside of the United States, saying that he wants to double non-U.S. exports in the next decade. So putting a timeline on it. What did you make of that? I'm going to call it a promise.
Well, I think there's opportunity here. I think most of our trade has been directly with the U.S. because it's such a big economy. We have the same languages. We had an open border for all of these years. But we also have opportunity here with a lot of trade deals with a lot of other countries, including the European Union, South Korea. I think it was mentioned Indonesia as well. So these are growth markets. These are markets where we don't have a lot of, we don't export an awful lot to. And so we can take advantage of that. It will be very, very difficult, though, to move quickly and to move enough so that we're not feeling the impact of our challenges with the U.S. economy, essentially. So we still do need to settle on some trade deal here with the U.S. That's really important.
Did you feel in that speech that you heard, he talked about sacrifices, difficult choices that'll have to be made in order to allow for spending, bold moves, is how he was describing it. And there are some, it does sound like there's going to be some significant spending, which leads me to the question of the deficit, because a lot has been said about a number that we don't know at the moment, but talk that it could be much higher than I don't know, perhaps someone like yourself might feel comfortable with. What are you anticipating, and how are you going to feel come November 4th about deficit?
Yeah, I do think there's a claim to be made here for investing in productive assets that will drive future growth. It's kind of called the golden rule. If you're investing in things that are going to drive future growth, then it's fair, intergenerationally fair, and you're not just consuming at the expense of future generations. So I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. I do worry about the challenges, though. We keep saying that, we're the best in the G7, best among many OECD countries in terms of our fiscal situation, but we're comparing ourselves to a lot of countries that are in trouble. So the bottom line will be, are we going to be able to manage the debt financing costs, which are already more than doubled where they were just a few years ago? And to me, The real question here is both deficits, both on the current and on the capital account, are going to feed the cost of financing that debt, and that's really important.
Pedro Antunes is a chief economist at the Conference Board of Canada. Thanks so much for that.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure.
Okay, once again, we've got Mark Marison here. He's watched the speech. We talked a couple of times in the lead up to that speech. I had made many notes here. What stood out to you?
What was really interesting to me was what a difference it is to have Mark Carney as the Prime Minister than Trudeau being the Prime Minister. What I was thinking about when I was listening to what he was talking about, I was thinking about what Trudeau did and what his legacy was. And you think about all the social programs that he improved. He had his hands full with COVID, and he legalized pot. But those are probably the big highlights for a lot of people. What he's talking about, what Mark Carney's talking about, is building. He's talking about building homes, and governments haven't been building homes since the 1980s. Like, this has been a huge backlog, huge problem for Canadians, and it's got to start happening now. It should have happened years ago. He's talking about building defense, and he's talking about building infrastructure, and he's got all this major projects office, which is going to be talking about building all kinds of different projects around the country that build the economy. These are things that don't happen overnight, but they're all things that I think have slipped. And to think that there's going to be a big deficit is because this money is going to be going into capital spending. It's not going to be going into program spending like it did in the previous election. In the previous government the same way.
Speaking of the Trudeau government, he also talked about immigration and saying that they are going to, I think the words he used were bring it under control and make sure that basically there are programs to support the people who are coming to Canada and make sure they are they're the people with the skills that Canada needs. That is a difference, certainly. And I don't think it's the first time we've heard that messaging from him, but to your point about differences between his predecessor and himself, that seems to be at least one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you think about how he communicated with the young people who were in the room? I mean, he started off with a sort of a light moment, talking about his own university experience.
No, that was all interesting, but I do think that one of the problems that he's been having is that he's been traveling the world doing all of this work, and it hasn't been since the election that he's had a substantive sort of marker down about what his vision is and what is that he's actually accomplishing. So this was a good backdrop for him, but this wasn't just meant for the students. This was meant for all Canadians, and he's getting people prepared for the fact that he's got a very ambitious agenda that in the short term might cost something, but in the long term we're going to have a lot of benefits.
Well, we'll all be watching November 4th, perhaps speaking to you again come November 4th, but thanks for being in studio with us to walk us through it all. Appreciate it. That is Mark Marison, former Liberal National Campaign co-chair and principal at Burrard Strategy. Thank you. Okay, and still to come, we're going to talk provincial politics because BC Conservative Party leader John Rustad says that he won't be stepping down despite a letter calling for his resignation. We've got that reaction next on Hannah Mansing Tonight.